Deep in the sands of time, buried beneath layers of history and forgotten memories, lies a story that explains one of the world's most enduring conflicts. A story that began not with politics or borders, but with two brothers, two mothers, and a promise from Allah that would shape the destiny of nations. This is not just another tale of ancient rivalry. This is the divine explanation, revealed in the Quran itself, of why two peoples who share the same Father, worship the same God, and follow the same moral teachings have been locked in struggle for thousands of years. The roots of this conflict stretch back over 4,000 years to a tent in the desert, where an old man named Ibrahim, peace be upon him, faced the most difficult test of his faith. What happened in that tent, what choices were made, and what promises were given, would echo through time and explain why the children of Isaac and the children of Ishmael would clash again and again throughout history. But this story is far more complex and fascinating than most people realize, because according to the Quran and authentic Islamic tradition, this conflict is not just about land or politics. It is about divine prophecy, ancient promises, and the unfolding of Allah's plan for humanity. Most people today see the Jewish-Arab conflict as a modern political dispute that began in the 20th century. They believe it started with the creation of Israel in 1948, or with the rise of Zionism in the late 1800s. But the Quran tells us a different story. According to Islamic sources, this conflict was foretold by Allah Himself, spoken about by the prophets, and has been playing out according to divine decree since the time of Ibrahim, peace be upon him. The Quran does not just explain what happened in the past, it also reveals what will happen in the future, including how this ancient struggle will finally come to an end. The story begins in the city of Ur, in ancient Mesopotamia, where a young man named Ibrahim, peace be upon him, first heard the voice of Allah calling him to leave everything behind and journey to a promised land. Ibrahim, peace be upon him, was not just any man. He was chosen by Allah to become the father of nations, the friend of Allah, and the ancestor of the greatest prophets who would ever live. When Allah called him, Ibrahim, peace be upon him, obeyed without question, leaving his family, his home, and everything familiar to follow Allah's command. But Allah's promise to Ibrahim, peace be upon him, came with a condition that would test his faith beyond imagination. Allah promised that Ibrahim, peace be upon him, would become the father of a great nation, that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. There was just one problem. Ibrahim, peace be upon him, was already an old man, and his wife Sarah was barren. They had been married for many years, but Allah had not blessed them with children. As the years passed, both Ibrahim, peace be upon him, and Sarah began to wonder how Allah's promise could possibly be fulfilled. It was Sarah herself who suggested a solution that would change the course of history forever. Following the customs of her time, she told her husband to take her Egyptian maidservant, Hagar, as a second wife, so that through her they might have a child. This was not an unusual arrangement in those days, and Sarah believed that if Hagar bore a son, that child could be considered her own and fulfill Allah's promise. Ibrahim, peace be upon him, agreed, and soon Hagar became pregnant with his child. But what seemed like a simple solution quickly became complicated. When Hagar realized she was carrying Ibrahim's child, her attitude towards Sarah changed. She began to look down on her mistress, perhaps feeling that her ability to bear children made her superior to the barren Sarah. This created tension in the household that would have consequences for thousands of years to come. Sarah, feeling humiliated and threatened, began to treat Hagar harshly. The situation became so difficult that Hagar decided to run away. As Hagar fled into the wilderness, alone and pregnant, Allah sent an angel to find her. The angel told her to return to Sarah and submit to her authority, but then gave her a prophecy that would echo through the ages. The angel said that her son would be called Ishmael, which means God has heard, because Allah had heard her suffering. More importantly, the angel told her that Ishmael would become the father of a great nation. that his descendants would be too numerous to count, and that he would be a wild man whose hand would be against every man, and every man's hand against him. This prophecy is crucial to understanding the Jewish-Arab conflict according to the Quran. The angel was not just making a prediction about Ishmael's personality. He was revealing Allah's plan for Ishmael's descendants, the Arab people. They would be strong, independent, and often in conflict with other nations. They would be warriors and wanderers, never easily conquered or controlled. And most significantly, they would often find themselves in opposition to the descendants of other nations, including their own half-brothers, the children of Isaac. Hagar returned to Abraham's household and gave birth to Ishmael. For 13 years, Ishmael was Ibrahim's only son, the child of the promise, the heir to everything. Ibrahim, peace be upon him, loved Ishmael deeply and believed that through him Allah's promise would be fulfilled. But then, when Ibrahim, peace be upon him, was 99 years old and Sarah was 90, Allah performed a miracle. Sarah became pregnant and gave birth to a son named Isaac. Suddenly, there were two sons, two potential heirs, and two different paths for Allah's promise to be fulfilled. The Quran tells us that Allah's plan included both sons. Both Isaac and Ishmael would become the fathers of great nations. Both would carry the blessing of Ibrahim, peace be upon him. Both would worship the one true God. But their paths would be different, and their descendants would often find themselves in conflict. Isaac would become the father of the Israelites, the chosen people through whom Allah would send many prophets, including Musa, peace be upon him, Dawood, peace be upon him, Sulaiman, peace be upon him, and Isa, peace be upon him. Ishmael would become the father of the Arabs, from whom would come the final prophet, Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the final revelation, the Quran. But this divine plan required a painful separation. As Isaac grew older, the tension between Sarah and Hagar returned. Sarah saw Ishmael playing with Isaac and became worried that Ishmael, as the older son, might claim the inheritance that she believed belonged to Isaac alone. She demanded that Ibrahim, peace be upon him, send Hagar and Ishmael away. The Quran tells us that this request troubled Ibrahim, peace be upon him, greatly, because he loved both his sons. But Allah told him to listen to Sarah, assuring him that through both Isaac and Ishmael, great nations would arise. So Ibrahim, peace be upon him, made the difficult decision to send Hagar and Ishmael into the wilderness. He gave them some food and water and left them in a desolate valley with no vegetation, no water source, and no human habitation. This valley would later become the holy city of Mecca. As Ibrahim, peace be upon him, walked away, leaving his beloved son and wife in the empty desert, Hagar called out to him, asking why he was leaving them in such a place. When Ibrahim, peace be upon him, told her it was by Allah's command, she said, "Then Allah will not let us perish." Her faith in that moment became a model for all believers. What happened next became one of the most important stories in Islamic tradition. When the water that Ibrahim, peace be upon him, had left them ran out, baby Ishmael began crying from thirst. Hagar, desperate to find water, ran back and forth between two hills, Safa and Marwa, looking for any sign of water or help. She made this journey 7 times, and today millions of Muslims performing Hajj retrace her steps in memory of her desperate search. Finally, exhausted and despairing, she returned to find that a spring of water had miraculously appeared next to Ishmael. This spring, known as Zamzam, still flows today and is considered one of the most blessed waters on earth. The appearance of the Zamzam well attracted a tribe called the Jurhum, who asked Hagar's permission to settle in the valley. She agreed, and Ishmael grew up among them, learning their language and customs. When he became a man, he married a woman from the Jurhum tribe and had many children. His descendants multiplied and spread throughout the Arabian Peninsula, becoming the various Arab tribes. Meanwhile, Isaac remained with Ibrahim, peace be upon him, and Sarah, and his descendants became the tribes of Israel. The separation of the two brothers was not just a family matter. According to the Quran and Islamic tradition, it was part of Allah's larger plan for humanity. Both sons were blessed, both were loved by Allah, and both were given important roles to play in human history. But their separation created two distinct peoples with different cultures, different languages, and different relationships with Allah's revelations. The stage was set for the complex relationship between Jews and Arabs that would unfold over the following millennia. The Quran tells us that many years later, when Ishmael had grown to manhood, Ibrahim, peace be upon him, received a command from Allah to visit his son in the Arabian desert. This visit was not just a family reunion. Allah commanded Ibrahim, peace be upon him, and Ishmael to build the first house of worship dedicated to the one true God. Working together, father and son constructed the Kaaba, the sacred black cube that Muslims around the world face when they pray. As they built, they prayed that Allah would make their descendants into a righteous nation and send among them a prophet who would guide them to the truth. This prayer was answered many centuries later when Muhammad, peace be upon him, a direct descendant of Ishmael, was born in Mecca and received the final revelation from Allah. But the path between Ibrahim's prayer and its fulfillment was long and complicated, marked by the rise and fall of both Jewish and Arab nations, periods of cooperation and conflict, and the gradual unfolding of Allah's plan for humanity. During the time of Musa, peace be upon him, the children of Israel were enslaved in Egypt and had forgotten much of the religion of their forefather Ibrahim, peace be upon him. Meanwhile, the descendants of Ishmael had spread across Arabia, but had also largely abandoned the pure monotheism of their ancestor, turning instead to idol worship and tribal superstitions. Both peoples needed divine guidance, and Allah provided it through prophets sent to each community. To the children of Israel, Allah sent Musa, peace be upon him, with the Torah, freeing them from slavery and giving them a comprehensive law to govern their lives. He established them as a chosen people, promising them a land flowing with milk and honey if they remained faithful to his commands. The Quran acknowledges this special status, stating that Allah favored the children of Israel above all other nations of their time and gave them prophets, kings, and blessings that no other people had received. But the Quran also tells us that the children of Israel repeatedly broke their covenant with Allah. They worshipped the golden calf, while Musa, peace be upon him, was receiving the Torah on Mount Sinai. They complained against Allah's provisions in the wilderness. They refused to enter the promised land when commanded, forcing Allah to make them wander in the desert for 40 years. Even after they were established in the Holy Land, they continued to disobey Allah's commands, kill his prophets, and mix his pure religion with pagan practices. The Quran describes how Allah sent prophet after prophet to the children of Israel, calling them back to the right path. Dawood, peace be upon him, united them into a powerful kingdom and composed beautiful psalms praising Allah. His son Sulaiman, peace be upon him, built the magnificent temple in Jerusalem and ruled over an empire that included both humans and jinn. But after Sulaiman's death, the kingdom split, and the children of Israel resumed their pattern of disobedience and rebellion against Allah's guidance. Meanwhile, the descendants of Ishmael were also struggling with faithfulness to Allah. After Ibrahim, peace be upon him, and Ishmael built the Kaaba, the Arabs continued to make pilgrimage to Mecca and maintained some memory of Ibrahim's religion. But over the centuries, they introduced innovations and corruptions into their worship. They began placing idols inside and around the Kaaba, claiming these idols were intermediaries who could bring them closer to Allah. They developed complex tribal systems based on pride, revenge, and honor, often leading to endless cycles of warfare and bloodshed. The two peoples, both descended from Ibrahim, peace be upon him, had both strayed from his pure monotheistic faith. But Allah's plan included redemption for both communities. To the children of Israel, he sent Isa, peace be upon him, Jesus, calling them back to the true spirit of Musa's law and teaching them about love, forgiveness, and spiritual purification. To the descendants of Ishmael, he would send Muhammad, peace be upon him, the final prophet, with the Quran, the final revelation that would correct all previous corruptions and guide humanity until the end of time. The relationship between Jews and Arabs became more complex when Isa, peace be upon him, began his mission among the children of Israel. The Quran tells us that while some Jews accepted Isa, peace be upon him, as a prophet, the majority rejected him, accusing him of blasphemy and plotting to kill him. Allah saved Isa, peace be upon him, from their plots. But the rejection of yet another prophet further diminished the special status that the children of Israel had enjoyed as Allah's chosen people. When the followers of Isa, peace be upon him, later developed Christianity and began spreading his message beyond the Jewish community, a new dynamic emerged. Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire and beyond, eventually reaching Arabia. Some Arab tribes converted to Christianity, while others remained attached to their ancestral idol worship. The stage was being set for the arrival of the final prophet, who would complete Allah's guidance to humanity and fundamentally change the relationship between all peoples, including Jews and Arabs. The birth of Muhammad, peace be upon him, in Mecca in the year 570 CE marked the beginning of a new chapter in the relationship between the children of Isaac and the children of Ishmael. Muhammad, peace be upon him, was a direct descendant of Ishmael through his son Kedar, fulfilling the ancient prophecy that a great nation would arise from Ishmael's lineage. When he received his first revelation in the cave of Hira at age 40, the final piece of Allah's plan began to fall into place. The message that Muhammad, peace be upon him, brought was not entirely new. It was the same message that had been revealed to Ibrahim, peace be upon him, Musa, peace be upon him, and Isa, peace be upon him. Worship Allah alone, establish justice, and care for the poor and orphaned, and prepare for the day of judgment. But this time, the message came with a crucial difference. It was declared to be the final revelation, after which no more prophets would be sent. It was revealed in Arabic, the language of Ishmael's descendants, and it explicitly stated that the Arabs, who had been marginalized in religious history, were now being given the responsibility of carrying Allah's final message to all humanity. This dramatically altered the religious and political landscape of the Middle East. For centuries, the children of Israel had held a special position as Allah's chosen people, the recipients of divine revelation and prophetic guidance. Now, suddenly, their half-brothers, the descendants of Ishmael, were claiming to have received the final and most complete revelation from Allah. Moreover, this new revelation, the Quran, while confirming much of what had been revealed in the Torah and the Gospel, also criticized both Jews and Christians for corrupting their scriptures and straying from the pure monotheism of Ibrahim, peace be upon him. The Quran specifically addressed the children of Israel, reminding them of Allah's blessings upon them, but also criticizing their historical pattern of disobedience. It accused them of killing prophets, breaking covenants, mixing truth with falsehood, and claiming exclusive relationships with Allah that He had never granted them. Most provocatively, it declared that Allah's covenant with them had been transferred to the new Muslim community, the Ummah of Muhammad, peace be upon him, making Muslims the inheritors of the spiritual legacy that had once belonged exclusively to the children of Israel. This theological revolution had immediate practical consequences. When Muhammad, peace be upon him, first began preaching in Mecca, he and his early followers faced persecution from the Arab tribes who profited from the pilgrimage to the idol-filled Kaaba. In 622 CE, they migrated to the city of Yathrib, later renamed Medina, where several Jewish tribes lived alongside Arab clans. Muhammad, peace be upon him, initially hoped that the Jews of Medina would recognize him as the prophet foretold in their scriptures and join the new Muslim community. The initial interactions between Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the Jewish tribes of Medina were complex and multifaceted. The Quran reveals that some individual Jews did recognize Muhammad, peace be upon him, as a genuine prophet and converted to Islam. The Quran states that these Jews recognized Muhammad, peace be upon him, as clearly as they recognized their own sons, indicating that his prophethood was obvious to those who honestly examined the evidence. However, the majority of the Jewish community in Medina rejected Muhammad's claims, leading to increasing tension and eventual conflict. The Quran explains this rejection in several ways. It suggests that some Jews refused to accept Muhammad, peace be upon him, because they expected the final prophet to come from among the children of Israel, not from their Arab cousins. Others allegedly altered or concealed parts of their scriptures that pointed to Muhammad's coming. Still others were said to be more concerned with maintaining their privileged position as the sole possessors of divine revelation than with accepting the truth, regardless of its source. The situation in Medina deteriorated when some of the Jewish tribes allegedly broke their agreements with the Muslim community and secretly aided their enemies during the various battles that the early Muslims fought for survival. The Quran and authentic Islamic historical sources describe how some Jewish leaders plotted against Muhammad, peace be upon him, attempted to assassinate him, and conspired with the pagan Arab tribes that were trying to destroy the fledgling Muslim state. These betrayals led to the expulsion of 2 Jewish tribes from Medina and the execution of the adult males of a 3rd tribe who were judged to have committed treason. These events, recorded in authentic Islamic sources, became a source of lasting tension between Muslims and Jews. From the Muslim perspective, they demonstrated the historical pattern of Jewish rejection and betrayal of Allah's prophets. From the Jewish perspective, they represented an unprovoked attack on their communities by an upstart Arab prophet who falsely claimed divine authority. The conquest of Mecca in 630 CE marked another turning point in the relationship between the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael. When Muhammad, peace be upon him, entered Mecca triumphantly and destroyed the idols that had filled the Kaaba for centuries, he was symbolically restoring the house that Ibrahim, peace be upon him, and Ishmael had built to its original purpose as a center of pure monotheistic worship. The Arabs, who had been considered religiously inferior by both Jews and Christians, were now the guardians of the holiest site in the religion that claimed to be the final and most perfect revelation from Allah. The rapid expansion of Islam after Muhammad's death in 632 CE further transformed the relationship between Jews and Arabs. Within a century, Muslim armies had conquered vast territories that included most of the lands where Jewish communities lived: Palestine, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, North Africa, and Spain. For the first time since the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, Jews found themselves living under the rule of fellow descendants of Ibrahim, peace be upon him, rather than under pagan or Christian empires. The Islamic treatment of Jewish communities under Muslim rule was complex and varied significantly over time and place. Islamic law granted Jews the status of dhimmis, protected people, who were allowed to practice their religion and manage their internal affairs in exchange for paying a special tax and accepting certain social restrictions. This arrangement was generally more tolerant than the persecution Jews faced in Christian Europe, where they were often expelled, forced to convert, or killed in pogroms. Many Jewish communities flourished under Muslim rule, producing great scholars, physicians, philosophers, and poets. However, the fundamental theological disagreement remained unresolved. Muslims continued to claim that Islam was the final and most perfect religion, that the Quran was the uncorrupted word of Allah, and that Muhammad, peace be upon him, was the final prophet whose message superseded all previous revelations. Jews continued to reject these claims, maintaining that the Torah was the eternal covenant between Allah and the children of Israel, that no prophet would come after Musa, peace be upon him, to change or abrogate the law. and that they remained Allah's chosen people regardless of what had happened to other nations. The Quran itself acknowledges that this disagreement would persist until the end of time. It states that Allah could have made all humanity into one community with one religion, but He chose instead to create diversity and test people through their differences. The Quran challenges Jews and Christians to compete with Muslims in righteous deeds rather than in theological arguments, suggesting that Allah will judge between all communities on the Day of Judgment and reveal who was truly following His guidance. This theological framework provided a basis for coexistence between Jews and Muslims for many centuries, but it also contained the seeds of ongoing conflict. Both communities believed they possessed the true interpretation of Allah's will. Both claimed special spiritual authority derived from their connection to Ibrahim, peace be upon him. Both saw themselves as the legitimate heirs to the Holy Land that Allah had promised to Ibrahim's descendants. These competing claims became increasingly problematic as both communities developed stronger national identities and political aspirations. The situation became more complicated with the rise of modern Zionism in the late 19th century. Zionism, the movement to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine, was both a religious and a secular nationalist movement. Religious Zionists saw the return to the Holy Land as the fulfillment of biblical prophecies and the beginning of the Messianic age. Secular Zionists viewed it as the solution to centuries of persecution and the key to Jewish survival in the modern world. Both forms of Zionism challenged the existing order in Palestine, where Arab Muslims and Christians had been the majority for over a millennium. From the Islamic perspective, Zionism represented a fundamental challenge to divine order as revealed in the Quran. Muslims believed that Allah had transferred His covenant from the children of Israel to the Muslim Ummah because of Jewish disobedience and rejection of prophets. The idea that Jews could reclaim the Holy Land and establish political sovereignty there seemed to contradict the Quranic narrative of Jewish spiritual decline and Muslim ascendancy. Moreover, the Zionist movement was supported primarily by Christian European powers that Muslims associated with centuries of colonial oppression and crusading warfare against Islamic lands. The establishment of Israel in 1948 brought the ancient theological conflict between the children of Isaac and Ishmael into the modern political arena with explosive consequences. For the first time since the destruction of the Second Temple, Jews had political sovereignty in the Holy Land. But this sovereignty came at the cost of displacing hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs, most of whom were Muslims who traced their ancestry back to the original Arab conquest of Palestine in the 7th century. The Quran provides a framework for understanding these modern developments that goes beyond simple political analysis. According to Islamic eschatology, the return of Jews to the Holy Land and their establishment of political power, there is not a sign of Allah's renewed favor toward them, but rather a prelude to their final judgment. The Quran and authentic prophetic traditions describe a time near the end of the world when the children of Israel will gather in the Holy Land, become extremely powerful and arrogant, and then face a devastating defeat that will humble them before Allah. These prophecies have profoundly influenced how many Muslims interpret the current Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Rather than seeing it as a simple territorial dispute that could be resolved through negotiation and compromise, many Muslims view it as part of a cosmic struggle between truth and falsehood that will ultimately be resolved by divine intervention. This perspective makes the conflict more intractable because it transforms a political dispute into a theological war in which compromise is seen as betrayal of Allah's revealed truth. The Islamic prophetic traditions describe specific signs that will precede the final resolution of the Jewish-Arab conflict. These include the appearance of the Dajjal, the false Messiah, who will deceive many people and claim divinity for himself. According to these traditions, the Dajjal will be followed primarily by Jews who will mistake him for their long-awaited Messiah. The true Messiah, Isa, peace be upon him, will then return to earth, defeat the Dajjal, and establish justice and peace throughout the world. These eschatological beliefs have practical implications for how many Muslims approach the current conflict. If they believe that the establishment of Israel and the gathering of Jews in the Holy Land are signs of the approaching end times, then they may see resistance to Israel not just as political activism, but as religious duty. Conversely, any Muslim leader who makes peace with Israel may be accused of betraying Islamic principles and helping to delay the ultimate victory of truth over falsehood. The Jewish perspective on these matters is equally complex and theologically charged. Religious Jews often interpret the establishment of Israel and the return to the Holy Land as the beginning of the messianic process that will culminate in the coming of the Messiah and the rebuilding of the Temple in Jerusalem. From this perspective, Jewish sovereignty over the Holy Land is not a political accident, but the fulfillment of divine promises made to Ibrahim, peace be upon him, Isaac, and their descendants thousands of years ago. This creates a theological deadlock that transcends politics. Muslims believe that Allah has permanently transferred his covenant from the children of Israel to the Muslim Ummah because of Jewish disobedience and rejection of Muhammad, peace be upon him. Jews believe that Allah's covenant with them is eternal and unconditional, and that no subsequent revelation can abrogate the promises made in the Torah. Both communities have sacred texts, prophetic traditions, and theological frameworks that support their positions, making compromise extremely difficult. The Quran itself suggests that this conflict will continue until Allah himself resolves it on the Day of Judgment. It states that the children of Israel will be gathered from all nations and then judged according to their deeds. It promises that those among them who truly believe in Allah and do righteous works will have their reward, while those who persist in disbelief and corruption will face punishment. Similarly, it warns Muslims that their own salvation depends not on their ethnic or religious identity, but on their faith and righteous actions. This Quranic perspective offers both hope and caution for those seeking to understand and resolve the Jewish-Arab conflict. On one hand, it suggests that the ultimate resolution lies beyond human politics and negotiations, requiring divine intervention and the establishment of true justice that transcends all human prejudices and claims. On the other hand, it reminds both communities that Allah judges people according to their actions, not their ancestry, and that righteousness and justice are more important than ethnic or religious identity. The story of the Jewish-Arab conflict, according to the Quran, is thus not simply a tale of ancient rivalry or modern politics. It is the unfolding of a divine plan that began with Ibrahim, peace be upon him, and will culminate with the return of Isa, peace be upon him, and the establishment of Allah's kingdom on earth. Understanding this perspective does not require accepting it as literally true, but recognizing it as a powerful force that shapes how millions of people interpret current events and make decisions about war and peace. The Quran's account of this conflict also offers important lessons about the dangers of ethnic and religious pride, the importance of justice and righteousness over identity and ancestry, and the ultimate unity of all human beings under Allah's sovereignty. It reminds us that Ibrahim, peace be upon him, was neither Jewish nor Arab, neither Christian nor Muslim, but simply a righteous man who submitted completely to Allah's will. His example suggests that the path to peace lies not in asserting competing claims to divine favor, but in returning to the pure monotheistic faith and righteous conduct that he exemplified. Whether one accepts the Quranic account as divine revelation or views it as an influential religious narrative, its impact on the Jewish-Arab conflict cannot be ignored. For over 14 centuries, this story has shaped how Muslims understand their relationship with Jews and their role in world history. It will continue to influence events in the Middle East and beyond until either the conflict is resolved through human wisdom and divine guidance, or until Allah himself intervenes to establish the justice and peace that both communities ultimately desire. The ancient promise made to Ibrahim, peace be upon him, that his descendants would become great nations, has certainly been fulfilled. Both the children of Isaac and the children of Ishmael have produced remarkable civilizations, contributed immensely to human knowledge and culture, and maintained their faith in the one true God through centuries of trial and persecution. Perhaps the time has come for both communities to remember their common Father, their shared faith, and their joint responsibility to establish justice and righteousness on earth, rather than continuing to fight over who deserves Allah's favor more. For in the end, the Quran teaches us, Allah's favor belongs to those who fear Him and do righteous deeds, regardless of their lineage or their religious labels.